It was a quiet autumn morning in the bustling city of Chicago. Judge Angela Thompson, a well-respected figure known for her fairness and dedication to justice, had just finished a long day at the courthouse. She had spent hours presiding over an emotionally charged case, and as she stepped out into the cool air, she felt a small sense of relief. Her black sedan was parked neatly in its designated spot, and she walked toward it with a calm but tired stride. For Angela, this was supposed to be a routine moment, a brief pause before heading home to rest. But what happened next would turn her ordinary day into something far more extraordinary. As Angela approached her car, she pulled out her keys and unlocked the door. Just as she opened it and started to get inside, 2 police officers appeared, out of nowhere. Their uniforms were crisp, their badges glinting under the pale sunlight. One of them raised a hand, signaling for her to stop. "Ma'am, step back from the vehicle," one officer commanded in a firm voice. Angela froze, confused. She looked at the officers, trying to understand what was happening. "Is there a problem, officers?" she asked politely, her tone calm but curious. She wasn't afraid. After all, she knew she hadn't done anything wrong. But the officers didn't seem interested in explanations. They exchanged a quick glance before one of them spoke again. "We've received a report that this car is stolen. We need to see your identification." Angela blinked, taken aback. "Stolen? This is my car," she replied firmly, pointing to the personalized license plate on the front of the vehicle. It clearly bore her name, Judge A. Thompson. Surely that would clear things up. But instead of acknowledging the obvious evidence, the officers ignored her words. One of them stepped closer, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. "Step away from the car now, ma'am," he repeated, his voice sharper this time. By now, a small crowd had begun to gather around the scene. People walking by stopped to watch, some pulling out their phones to record the interaction. Angela could feel the weight of their stares as she stood there, still trying to make sense of the situation. She reached into her purse to retrieve her driver's license, but before she could even show it, one of the officers grabbed her arm. "You're under arrest," he said coldly. The world seemed to slow down for Angela in that moment. She couldn't believe what was happening. Here she was, a respected judge, someone who had dedicated her life to upholding the law, and she was being treated like a criminal. As the officer tightened the handcuffs around her wrists, Angela felt a mix of emotions rushing through her. Confusion, anger, and humiliation. Tears welled up in her eyes, not because she was scared, but because she couldn't comprehend how this could happen. The crowd murmured among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief. A few people shouted questions at the officers, asking why they were arresting her, but the officers didn't respond. Instead, they continued with their actions, treating Angela as though she were any other suspect. Passers-by whispered to each other, speculating about what might have led to this strange encounter. Some recognized Angela immediately, either from news interviews or public appearances she had made as a judge. Others simply couldn't believe what they were seeing, a black woman in professional attire, standing beside her own car, being accused of theft. As Angela stood there in handcuffs, her mind raced. She thought about all the cases she had presided over, all the times she had fought for fairness and equality in the courtroom. And yet here she was, facing the very biases she worked so hard to combat every day. Was this happening because of her race? She couldn't help but wonder. Her dark skin and confident demeanor clearly didn't match whatever stereotype these officers had in mind when responding to the supposed theft report. Despite the chaos surrounding her, Angela tried to remain composed. She took deep breaths, reminding herself that this was just a misunderstanding, that surely, once the officers realized who she was, everything would be sorted out. But the longer she stood there, the more surreal the situation felt. It was as if the world had turned upside down, and she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Little did Angela know, this incident was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would soon capture national attention and spark important conversations about race, bias, and accountability. But for now, all she could do was stand there, waiting for someone to listen, to see the truth and to set things right. Angela stood there, her hands cuffed behind her back, feeling the cold metal press uncomfortably into her skin. The officers had moved her a few steps away from her car, positioning her near their patrol vehicle. Her heart pounded as she tried to process what was happening. She repeated herself louder this time, hoping the officers would finally listen. "I'm Judge Angela Thompson," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the growing crowd. "This is my car. You're making a mistake." But the officers didn't seem to hear her, or if they did, they chose to ignore her words. One of them opened the door to the patrol car, signaling for Angela to get inside. "Ma'am, please cooperate," he said, his tone dismissive. It was as though her identity, her position, and her explanation meant nothing. For Angela, it was a surreal experience, like being caught in a scene from someone else's life. How could this be happening? She wasn't just any citizen, she was a judge, someone who had spent years ensuring that justice was served fairly and impartially. Yet here she was, being treated like a common criminal. The crowd around them continued to grow. Some people were filming the incident on their phones, capturing every moment. Others were whispering among themselves, trying to piece together what they were witnessing. A few recognized Angela immediately. "That's Judge Thompson," one woman exclaimed, pointing at Angela. Another man nodded, his face filled with disbelief. "She's a judge. Why are they arresting her?" he asked, no one in particular. Despite the growing attention, the officers showed no signs of backing down. They ignored the murmurs of the crowd and continued with their actions, treating Angela as though she were guilty until proven innocent. As she sat in the back seat of the patrol car, her mind raced. She thought about the countless times she had presided over cases where individuals, often black or brown, had been wrongfully accused or mistreated by law enforcement. She had always fought for fairness, always advocated for justice. And yet, now she found herself on the receiving end of the very injustices she worked so hard to combat. Her thoughts turned to the license plate on her car, the one that clearly bore her name. Had the officers even bothered to look at it? Or had they already made up their minds based on assumptions and biases? Angela couldn't help but feel a deep sense of frustration and sadness. She had always believed in the system, in its ability to correct itself when mistakes were made. But sitting there in handcuffs, she began to question whether that belief was misplaced. As the minutes ticked by, the tension in the air grew thicker. The crowd became more vocal, some people shouting accusations at the officers. "Why are you doing this? She's a judge," one man yelled angrily. Another woman called out, "This is wrong, let her go." Despite the mounting pressure, the officers remained unmoved. They stood beside the patrol car, talking quietly among themselves while keeping a close eye on Angela. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, one of the officers approached the car. He leaned down slightly, looking at Angela through the open window. "We're going to need to verify your information," he said, his tone slightly less harsh than before. Angela stared at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. "My information is right here," she replied, nodding toward her purse, which had been placed on the hood of the patrol car. "And my license plate says my name. What more do you need?" The officer hesitated for a moment, then walked back to retrieve Angela's belongings. As he rifled through her purse, searching for her driver's license, Angela noticed something shift in the crowd. People were becoming more vocal, their voices rising in protest. Someone shouted, "This is Judge Angela Thompson, she's not a thief." Another person added, "You can't treat her like this." It was then that a young woman stepped forward, holding her phone high above her head. She had been filming the entire incident and now decided to speak up. "Listen up, everyone," she called out, her voice clear and strong. "This is Judge Angela Thompson. She's a respected judge in this city. You're arresting the wrong person." Her words echoed through the street, drawing even more attention to the scene. For the first time since the ordeal began, the officers seemed unsure of themselves. They exchanged glances, their expressions betraying a mix of confusion and unease. One of them muttered something into his radio, likely calling for backup or clarification. Meanwhile, the crowd continued to grow louder, their chants of, "Let her go," ringing out like a chorus. As the situation escalated, Angela felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, she was grateful for the support of the crowd. Their voices reminded her that she wasn't alone, that there were people who saw her humanity and understood the injustice of what was happening. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling of humiliation that came with being treated this way. She had always prided herself on her professionalism, on her ability to remain calm and composed in difficult situations. But this was different. This wasn't just a professional challenge. It was a deeply personal attack on her dignity. Finally, after what felt like hours, the officers returned to the patrol car. One of them unlocked the handcuffs and removed them from Angela's wrists. "We've confirmed your identity," he said, his voice tinged with embarrassment. "We apologize for the misunderstanding." Angela rubbed her sore wrists, her expression unreadable. She wanted to lash out to demand answers and accountability, but instead she took a deep breath and simply nodded. "I want to know why this happened," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "And I want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." The officers didn't respond. They simply stepped aside, allowing Angela to walk back to her car. As she stood there surrounded by a sea of faces, some supportive, others outraged, she realized that this wasn't over. This incident wasn't just about her. It was about something much bigger. It was about the systemic issues that allowed moments like this to happen in the first place. And Angela knew that she couldn't let it end here. She had to take a stand, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been wrongfully accused or mistreated because of their race, their gender, or their background. As the crowd began to disperse and the officers retreated to their patrol car, Angela stood tall, her resolve stronger than ever. This wasn't the first time someone had been unfairly targeted, and it wouldn't be the last. But maybe, just maybe, this moment could spark a change that would ensure no one else had to endure what she had just experienced. The moment the handcuffs were removed, Angela felt a wave of conflicting emotions rushing through her. Relief washed over her as she realized the nightmare was finally coming to an end, or so she thought. But alongside that relief came anger, frustration, and a deep sense of injustice. She had been treated like a criminal in broad daylight, humiliated in front of strangers, and subjected to a level of scrutiny no one should have to endure. And for what? A false report about a stolen car? It didn't make sense. As she stood beside her sedan, rubbing her wrists where the cuffs had left red marks, Angela turned to face the officers who now seemed visibly uncomfortable. "I want answers," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the lingering tension in the air. "Why did you arrest me without verifying my identity? Why didn't you check the license plate or ask for proof before assuming I was guilty?" Her tone was calm but unyielding, demanding accountability. One of the officers shifted awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. "We received a report that this vehicle was stolen," he mumbled, his words trailing off. "We followed protocol." "Protocol?" Angela repeated, her voice rising slightly. "Your protocol is to arrest someone without evidence? To ignore basic facts because it's easier to assume guilt than to confirm innocence?" She shook, her head disbelief etched across her face. This isn't just negligence, it's prejudice. The crowd around them, though thinner now, remained engaged. Many people stayed behind, unwilling to leave until they understood what had happened. Some continued filming, capturing every word exchanged between Angela and the officers. Others whispered among themselves, their voices filled with outrage. One man shouted, "You messed with the wrong person today." Another woman added, "She's a judge. Do you even know who she is?" Angela appreciated the support, but she also knew that this wasn't just about her. Yes, she was a judge, a public figure with a platform. But what if she hadn't been? What if she had been an ordinary black woman, without connections or recognition? Would the outcome have been different? Would anyone have believed her story? Her thoughts were interrupted when the second officer stepped forward, attempting to explain further. "Ma'am, we acted on information provided to us." he said hesitantly. Someone filed a report claiming this car was stolen. We responded accordingly. And who filed that report? Angela asked sharply, narrowing her eyes. Did you verify it? Did you check whether it was legitimate or malicious? Or did you simply see a black woman standing next to an expensive car and decide she must be suspicious? The question hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly aware of how damning the situation looked. They didn't respond immediately, instead fumbling with their radios and notebooks as if searching for something, anything to say in their defense. Meanwhile, the young woman who had earlier spoken up stepped closer, still holding her phone. I've got everything on video, she announced loudly, addressing both Angela and the officers. If you try to deny what happened here today, I'll make sure everyone sees it. Her statement drew murmurs of approval from the remaining onlookers. Someone else chimed in saying, "Yeah, this needs to go public. People need to know what's happening." Angela nodded slowly, realizing the power of the moment. This wasn't just a personal injustice. It was a reflection of larger societal issues. Racial profiling, implicit bias, and systemic inequality weren't abstract concepts. They were real, tangible forces that impacted lives every single day. And now, thanks to the courage of those around her, there was an opportunity to shine a light on these problems. By this point, news of the incident had begun to spread beyond the immediate scene. Several bystanders had posted videos online, tagging local news outlets and using hashtags like #Justice for Angela and End Racial Profiling. Within minutes, reporters started arriving at the location, eager to cover the unfolding drama. Cameras flashed as journalists approached Angela, bombarding her with questions. "Judge Thompson, can you tell us what happened here today?" One reporter asked. "Do you believe race played a role in your arrest?" Angela took a deep breath, composing herself before responding. She knew this was her chance to speak not only for herself, but for countless others who had faced similar injustices. "Today I experienced firsthand the biases that exist within our society," she began, her voice steady and resolute. "I am a black woman, a judge, and a public servant. If this can happen to me, if I can be accused of stealing my own car and treated as a criminal without cause, then what does it mean for those without my privilege? What does it mean for the average person who doesn't have a title or a platform to defend themselves?" Her words resonated deeply, not just with the crowd gathered around her, but with viewers watching the coverage unfold online. Social media erupted with reactions as people shared videos, expressed outrage, and called for accountability. Hashtags related to the incident quickly trended nationwide, sparking conversations about racism, police misconduct, and the urgent need for reform. Back at the scene, the officers tried to retreat, climbing into their patrol car and preparing to leave. But Angela wasn't going to let them walk away so easily. She approached the vehicle, tapping on the window, to get their attention. When one of them rolled it down reluctantly, she leaned in and spoke directly. "This isn't over," she said, her voice firm. "I will be filing a formal complaint, and I expect a full investigation into what happened here today. You owe me, and everyone else, an explanation." The officer nodded silently, unable to meet her gaze. With that, the patrol car pulled away, leaving Angela standing amidst the crowd. As the adrenaline began to fade, she felt a mix of exhaustion and determination. She knew the fight ahead wouldn't be easy. Holding law enforcement accountable was never simple, especially when systemic issues were involved. But she also knew that this moment had the potential to create real change, if she used it wisely. Later that evening, as Angela sat in her living room replaying the events of the day in her mind, her phone buzzed constantly with notifications. Messages poured in from friends, colleagues, and even strangers offering support and solidarity. News outlets continued to cover the story, amplifying her message and keeping the pressure on local authorities to act. Angela scrolled through social media, reading comments from people who had been inspired by her courage. One post caught her. "Ours, thank you, Judge Thompson, for standing up and speaking out. Your voice matters." Tears welled up in Angela's eyes, not out of sadness, but out of hope. Hope that this painful experience could lead to something meaningful. Hope that her story would inspire others to demand justice and push for reforms. And hope that someday no one else would have to endure what she had gone through that day. As she set her phone aside and leaned back on the couch, Angela made a silent promise to herself. She wouldn't let this incident define her, but she would use it as fuel to continue fighting for equality, fairness, and justice. Because if there was one thing she had learned from this ordeal, it was that silence only perpetuated the problem. Speaking up, no matter how difficult, was the first step toward creating a better future for herself and for everyone else. The days following Angela's arrest were nothing short of a whirlwind. What had started as an isolated incident quickly escalated into a national conversation about race, bias, and accountability within law enforcement. The videos captured by bystanders went viral, spreading across social media platforms like wildfire. People from all walks of life, activists, celebrities, politicians, and ordinary citizens, joined the chorus of voices demanding answers and action. Hashtags like #Justice for Angela and #End Racial Profiling dominated Twitter trends, while Instagram posts featuring Angela's story garnered millions of likes and shares. Local news outlets weren't far behind. Reporters scrambled to cover every angle of the story, interviewing legal experts, civil rights advocates, and members of the community who spoke passionately about systemic racism and police misconduct. One prominent lawyer explained during a televised segment, "This isn't just about Judge Thompson being treated unfairly. It's about how implicit biases shape interactions between law enforcement and communities of color. Her case highlights a much bigger issue, one that we can no longer ignore." As the story gained momentum, protests erupted outside the police department responsible for the botched arrest. Hundreds of demonstrators gathered, holding signs with messages like "Black Lives Matter," "Accountability Now," and "Respect Judges, Respect Justice." Some chanted slogans such as "No Justice, No Peace," while others shared personal stories of their own encounters with police discrimination. The energy was palpable, a mix of anger, frustration, and determination to see change. Amidst the growing outrage, Angela decided to address the public directly. She held a press conference at a local community center, standing tall despite the emotional toll of the past few days. Dressed in a crisp suit, she faced a room packed with reporters, cameras flashing as they vied for the best shot. But Angela didn't flinch. Instead, she exuded strength and resolve. "This wasn't just an isolated mistake," she began, her voice steady but filled with conviction. "It was a symptom of a deeper problem, a system that allows racial profiling and unchecked biases to dictate how people are treated. I am not just a judge. I am a Black woman who experienced firsthand the very prejudices I've spent my career fighting against. If this can happen to me, with my education, my title, and my visibility, then what does it mean for those without my privilege? For the single mother working 2 jobs, or the teenager walking home from school, or anyone else who doesn't fit society's narrow definition of innocent?" Her words struck a chord, resonating deeply with audiences across the country. Many saw themselves in her story, recalling moments when they too had been judged based on stereotypes rather than facts. Others admired her courage, recognizing that speaking out came with risks, but also immense potential for impact. By using her platform to amplify the voices of marginalized communities, Angela became more than just a victim of injustice. She became a symbol of resilience and advocacy. In response to the mounting pressure, the police department issued a formal statement acknowledging the incident and promising transparency. "We regret the distress caused to Judge Angela Thompson and assure the public that we are conducting a thorough internal investigation," the statement read. "Our officers are committed to upholding the highest standards of professionalism and fairness, and any deviation from these principles will be addressed accordingly." While some viewed this as a step in the right direction, others remained skeptical. Civil rights organizations called for more concrete actions, urging policymakers to implement comprehensive reforms aimed at increasing accountability and reducing discriminatory practices. Leaders from groups like the NAACP and ACLU held rallies and town hall meetings, emphasizing the need for systemic change rather than temporary fixes. Meanwhile, Angela filed a formal complaint against the officers involved, vowing to pursue legal action if necessary. She worked closely with her attorney to ensure that her case would serve as a catalyst for broader discussions about policing and racial equity. "This isn't just about punishing individuals," she told reporters during another interview. "It's about addressing the root causes of these issues so that no one else has to go through what I did." Her determination inspired countless others to join the fight for justice. Grassroots movements sprang up in cities nationwide, organizing marches, petitions, and educational workshops focused on dismantling systemic racism. Students organized walkouts at schools, chanting slogans and carrying banners that read, "Learn justice, teach equality." Artists created murals and installations honoring Angela's bravery, turning public spaces into visual reminders of the ongoing struggle for fairness. Even lawmakers took notice. Members of Congress introduced legislation aimed at reforming police, training programs, and implementing stricter oversight measures. State legislatures debated bills designed to combat racial profiling and improve transparency in law enforcement agencies. While progress was slow and often met with resistance, the momentum generated by Angela's story kept the pressure on decision-makers to act. For Angela, the weeks following the incident were emotionally draining, yet profoundly meaningful. She received thousands of letters and messages from people expressing gratitude for her courage and solidarity with her cause. Some shared their own experiences of discrimination, thanking her for giving them hope. Others pledged to support her efforts however they could, whether through donations, volunteering, or simply spreading awareness. Despite the overwhelming support, Angela knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Holding institutions accountable required persistence and patience, qualities she had honed over years of serving as a judge. But she also recognized that this moment presented a rare opportunity to drive real change. By keeping the spotlight on her case and refusing to let it fade into obscurity, she hoped to inspire lasting reforms that would benefit generations to come. One evening, as Angela sat alone in her study reviewing notes for an upcoming speech, she reflected on everything that had transpired. The ordeal had tested her in ways she never imagined, forcing her to confront painful truths about the world she lived in. Yet it had also shown her the power of collective action, the way people from all corners of society could unite around a common goal and demand better. She smiled faintly, feeling a glimmer of optimism amidst the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in justice, equality, and the possibility of a brighter future. And as long as there were people willing to stand up and speak out, Angela knew that change was possible, even if it took time. With renewed determination, she turned back to her notes, ready to continue the work that lay ahead. The journey was far from over, but she was prepared to face whatever challenges came her way. After all, she had already proven one thing beyond doubt: silence was no longer an option. The days following Angela's press conference were filled with tension and anticipation. The police department, now under intense public scrutiny, moved swiftly to address the fallout from the incident. An internal investigation was launched to examine the actions of the officers involved in Angela's wrongful arrest. For the two officers at the center of the controversy, life had become a whirlwind of uncertainty. They were placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the inquiry, their names plastered across news headlines and social media posts, alongside accusations of misconduct and racial bias. The investigation revealed glaring lapses in judgment. According to the preliminary findings, the officers had failed to verify ownership of the vehicle before making an arrest, a basic step that could have prevented the entire ordeal. Instead, they relied solely on the false report claiming the IT car was stolen, without conducting even a cursory check of the personalized license plate or asking Angela for proof of ownership. Investigators also noted that the officers appeared to disregard Angela's repeated explanations about her identity and profession, raising concerns about implicit bias influencing their behavior. As the details emerged, public outrage intensified. Many viewed the officers' actions as emblematic of broader issues within law enforcement, issues like racial profiling, lack of accountability, and systemic discrimination. Protesters continued to gather outside the police department, holding signs that read, "Bias has no place in policing and fire the officers who failed Judge Thompson." Civil rights organizations demanded not only disciplinary action against the officers, but also sweeping reforms to prevent similar incidents in the future. Eventually, the police chief held a press conference to announce the results of the investigation. Standing behind a podium flanked by members of the city council, he looked visibly uncomfortable as cameras flashed and reporters jotted down notes. After a thorough review of the evidence, he began, his voice heavy with caution. "It is clear that the officers involved made significant errors in judgment during their interaction with Judge Angela Thompson. Their failure to follow proper procedures reflects poorly on our department and undermines public trust." He went on to outline the consequences. Both officers would face immediate suspension without pay, followed by mandatory retraining on topics such as implicit bias, de-escalation techniques, and proper protocol for handling theft reports. Additionally, the department announced plans to implement new measures aimed at increasing transparency and accountability, including body cameras for all officers and regular audits of police conduct. While some praised these steps as a move in the right direction, others argued that the punishments weren't severe enough. Critics pointed out that suspensions and retraining programs were often used as band-aids rather than addressing deeper systemic problems. Activists called for more drastic measures, such as termination of the officers involved and stricter oversight. Mechanisms to ensure compliance with anti-discrimination policies. "This isn't just about two bad apples," one activist said during a televised debate. "It's about a rotten tree that keeps producing them. Until we cut it down, nothing will change." For Angela, the announcement brought mixed emotions. On one hand, she felt a sense of vindication knowing that her complaint had led to tangible consequences. But on the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that the response fell short of true justice. Yes, the officers had been disciplined, but what about the systemic issues that allowed this to happen in the first place? What about the countless others who had faced similar treatment but didn't have the privilege or platform to fight back? Determined to keep the momentum going, Angela decided to take legal action. With the support of her attorney, she filed a lawsuit against the police department alleging racial profiling and violation of her civil rights. The lawsuit sought damages not only for the emotional distress she endured, but also to hold the department accountable for its role in perpetuating discriminatory practices. Filing this lawsuit isn't about revenge, Angela explained in an interview. It's about sending a message that no one is above the law, not even those sworn to uphold it. If we don't demand accountability, then these kinds of injustices will continue unchecked. Her decision sparked widespread debate. Some applauded her courage, seeing the lawsuit as a necessary step toward achieving lasting reform. Others questioned whether taking legal action would alienate potential allies within the police force, particularly those working to improve conditions from within. Regardless of differing opinions, one thing was certain. Angela's case had become a lightning rod for discussions about race, power, and accountability in America. Meanwhile, the officers themselves struggled to cope with the aftermath of the incident. Once respected members of their community, they now found themselves vilified and ostracized. Friends stopped calling, neighbors avoided eye contact, and colleagues distanced themselves out of fear of association. One officer reportedly confided in a friend that he regretted his actions but felt powerless to undo the damage. "I never meant to hurt anyone," he allegedly said. "I was just doing my job." But Angela knew better than anyone that intentions didn't erase impact. Whether the officers acted out of malice or negligence, the result was the same. She had been humiliated, traumatized, and treated as less than human, all because of biases embedded in the system they represented. As far as she was concerned, apologies weren't enough. Real change required more than words. It required action. The weeks turned into months, and the legal battle dragged on. Hearings were scheduled, motions were filed, and expert witnesses testified about the prevalence of racial profiling in law enforcement. Throughout it all, Angela remained steadfast, using every opportunity to highlight the broader implications of her case. She gave interviews, wrote op-eds, and spoke at rallies, always emphasizing the need for systemic reform. Her message resonated deeply, inspiring people across the country to join the fight for justice. In courtrooms, classrooms, and living rooms, conversations about policing and racial equity gained new urgency. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at increasing accountability, while grassroots activists organized campaigns to educate communities about their rights. Even celebrities joined the cause, using their platforms to amplify Angela's story and call for meaningful change. By the time the lawsuit reached its conclusion, the nation had undergone a transformation, or at least the beginnings of one. While the final verdict brought closure to Angela's personal journey, it also marked the start of something bigger, a collective effort to dismantle the structures of inequality that had long plagued society. For Angela, the struggle was far from over, but she took comfort in knowing that she wasn't alone. Together with countless others standing beside her, she was paving the way for a brighter, fairer future. And though the scars of that fateful day would always remain, they served as a reminder of why she fought so hard. Not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved to be seen, heard, and treated with dignity. Months had passed since the day Angela Thompson was wrongfully arrested, but the impact of that single incident continued to reverberate across the nation. What started as a deeply personal and humiliating experience for Angela had transformed into something much larger, a movement that refused to be silenced. The lawsuit she filed against the police department reached its conclusion, with the court ruling in her favor. The verdict was clear. The officers involved had acted negligently and discriminatorily violating Angela's civil rights. In addition to financial compensation, the ruling mandated sweeping reforms within the police department, including stricter accountability measures, mandatory bias training, and independent oversight committees to review cases of misconduct. But, beyond the legal victory, Angela's story became a symbol of hope and resilience. It ignited conversations about systemic racism, implicit bias, and the urgent need for reform not just in law enforcement, but in every institution where inequality persisted. Her courage inspired countless individuals to speak up about their own experiences with discrimination, creating a domino effect of awareness and advocacy. People who had once felt powerless now saw themselves in Angela's fight, a reminder that even the most unjust situations could become catalysts for change. In the weeks following the court's decision, Angela found herself at the center of a growing wave of activism. She traveled across the country, speaking at conferences, town halls, and universities, sharing her story and urging others to join the push for justice. Her speeches were powerful yet simple, delivered in a way that resonated with audiences from all walks of life. "I didn't ask to be here," she often began, her voice steady and heartfelt. "No one chooses to face injustice. But when it happens, we have two options: let it break us or use it to build something better. I chose to build." Her message struck a chord, especially among young people who saw Angela as both a role model and a beacon of possibility. Students organized campaigns on college campuses, calling for greater diversity in faculty hiring and curriculum changes that addressed racial inequities. High schoolers staged walkouts, demanding that their schools teach African American history and provide resources to combat bullying and prejudice. Artists created murals and poetry dedicated to Angela's journey, turning public spaces into vibrant reminders of the ongoing struggle for equality. Even policymakers took notice. Legislators introduced bills aimed at addressing systemic issues within policing, education, and housing. Some states passed laws requiring independent investigations of police misconduct, while others allocated funding for community programs designed to bridge gaps between law enforcement and marginalized groups. Though progress was slow and incremental, Angela's case kept the pressure on. ensuring that these efforts remained a priority. For Angela, the months after the trial were a whirlwind of activity, but also reflection. She spent many evenings, sitting alone in her study, thinking about how far she had come since that autumn morning when her world turned upside down. There were moments when the weight of everything, the media attention, the protests, the legal battles, felt overwhelming. But there were also moments of profound gratitude when she realized the ripple effects of her actions. Strangers sent her letters thanking her for giving them hope. Parents told her they used her story to teach their children about standing up for what's right. Even critics of her methods acknowledged that her persistence had sparked important conversations. One evening, as she scrolled through social media, Angela came across a video posted by a young woman named Maya. In the clip, Maya stood in front of a crowd of protesters holding a sign that read, "Because of Judge Thompson, I know my voice matters." As the camera panned to the audience, dozens of people held up similar signs, each bearing messages of empowerment inspired by Angela's fight. Tears welled up in Angela's eyes as she watched the video. This was why she had pushed forward despite the pain and exhaustion. This was why she had chosen to turn her personal ordeal into a public mission. Yet Angela knew the work wasn't finished. While the verdict and subsequent reforms marked significant victories, they were only pieces of a much larger puzzle. Systemic racism and inequality weren't problems that could be solved overnight. They required sustained effort and unwavering commitment. Angela understood this better than anyone, which is why she vowed to keep fighting, not just for herself, but for future generations. She partnered with civil rights organizations to launch initiatives focused on education and advocacy. One program, titled Justice Starts Here, aimed to teach students about their constitutional rights and how to navigate interactions with law enforcement safely. Another initiative provided free legal assistance to individuals who had experienced racial profiling or other forms of discrimination. Through these efforts, Angela hoped to equip communities with the tools they needed to challenge injustice wherever they encountered it. At the same time, Angela worked tirelessly to amplify the voices of those who had long been ignored. She collaborated with grassroots activists, lending her platform to highlight stories of resilience and resistance. Whether it was a single mother fighting eviction, a teenager advocating for safer schools, or a formerly incarcerated individual rebuilding their life, Angela made sure their struggles were seen and heard. She believed that true change could only happen when everyone had a seat at the table, and she was determined to make space for those who had been excluded. As the year drew to a close, Angela attended a ceremony honoring her contributions to the fight for justice. Standing on stage before a packed auditorium, she accepted an award named after a legendary civil rights leader. The applause was thunderous, but Angela's expression remained humble. When she stepped up to the microphone, the room fell silent, every eye fixed on her. "I stand here today not because I am extraordinary," she began, her voice soft but commanding. "I stand here because I am ordinary. I am a black woman who woke up one morning, went to work, and came home hoping to live my life with dignity. What happened to me that day wasn't unique. It was a reflection of the biases and barriers that exist in our society. And if we want to create a world where no one has to endure what I did, then we must confront those biases head-on." Her words echoed through the hall, met with nods of agreement and murmurs of encouragement. As she concluded her speech, Angela looked out at the diverse crowd gathered before her, young and old, black and white, rich and poor, and felt a surge of optimism. Change was possible. It might take time and it might require sacrifice, but together, they could build a future rooted in fairness and respect. When the ceremony ended, Angela walked outside into the cool night air. The city lights twinkled around her, casting a warm glow over the streets. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe deeply, savoring the quiet. Then, steeling herself for the road ahead, she climbed into her car and drove home. The journey wasn't over, but Angela knew she wasn't alone. Across the country, people were rising up, demanding justice and working toward a brighter tomorrow. And though the scars of her experience would always remain, they served as a reminder of why she fought so hard. For herself, for her community, and for the generations yet to come.